Soren Petro hosts on Sports Radio 810 in Kansas City. He now joins Bleck Abdalla now to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs. And Soren, when you look at Kenneth Walker signing with the Chiefs, what did you think about that signing when the news came across yesterday?
I think it's kind of par for the course on how they do things. I mean, when they've had problems, they kind of dive in full force. When they got beat up by the Bucks in the Super Bowl in 2020, they came back and drafted Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, traded for Joe Tooney, traded for Orlando Brown, completely reworked the offensive line. Their running game was atrocious and has been. It's been declining over the last couple of years. And so it doesn't shock me that they would go make the biggest splash they possibly could to get this done. I'm not saying I would agree with it. I think there's a reason why teams have gotten away. Why last year no running back went for more than like $4.5 million, and lots of them went for about $3 million. We've seen that the new trend is light boxes for every defense out there. So the teams that were effective this year played heavy and ran the ball. So I think there's a bit of a overreaction to it and overcorrection. The Chiefs could have gotten running backs a lot cheaper last year, but they find themselves chasing the new trend and they decided that Kenneth Walker was their guy. And, I'll be honest with you, if you're going to give a guy what could be up to $15 million per year, he needs to be better than he's ever been for this contract to make to make sense. And I don't think that's the spot you necessarily want to be in free agency.
That's what doesn't really make sense, Soren, is that you mentioned all those other positions that they threw money at. Those positions make sense to throw a bunch of money at. And the Chiefs, such a successful organization, a championship organization with Andy Reid as head coach, and they've done this so well for so long. It was just kind of surprising that they gave Kenneth Walker that much money, and then they turn around and they give Travis Kelce $12 million for, I think it's more of like a farewell package, like a thank you for your service. It just seems to me that I've been kind of working on this theory that Kansas City this year, they're not taking like a gap year, but it's more of like a, hey, we're going to kind of like reset and develop some young players because we have such a high draft pick throughout the rest of these rounds. And the Broncos are going to be good. The Chargers are going to be better. And this night might not be another Super Bowl year for them, but just kind of like a reset and retool and reload for 2027.
I would have said I'm in total agreement until your last part. I'm not saying your conclusion is wrong, but I don't think that's their mindset. I think their mindset is that they're back in it and they're going to win a championship. But I'm with you. I think it may have been better to take a step back, to try to take 2 steps forward, to think about the, 5 to 7 years of premium football you have with Patrick Mahomes and not try to immediately jump right back in and maybe fall short of being as good a team as you can be. Listen, they have lived on the stars and Jags approach to the salary cap for quite a while. I mean, when you have Patrick Mahomes, okay, we get it. You're going to pay the quarterback. And he's done a great job of giving him a contract that's been team friendly and that they can rework. But Travis Kelce was the highest paid tight end. Creed Humphrey was the highest paid center. Trey Smith was the highest paid guard. Chris Jones was the highest paid defensive tackle. Nick Bolton was almost the highest paid middle linebacker. When you talk about guard and middle linebacker, I'm a bigger fan of the center spot over the guard spot. But last year, last offseason, $23 million for Trey Smith, $15 million for Nick Bolton. I mean, these are big contracts for spots that aren't necessarily, premium positions. And then you find yourself with Trent McDuffie coming due and you go, okay, well, we've got to trade him. And now that I think people in Kansas City won't mind as much. They've traded Marcus Peters. They've traded L'Jarius Sneed. They've always been able to develop defensive backs. Steve Spagnuolo, Dave Merritt, their DB coach. I don't know why he's not a defensive coordinator because he has been unbelievable at developing defensive backs. I mean, until Trent McDuffie, they really didn't invest heavily in that position, but they still had guys that could make Pro Bowls. And so they feel confident that they can develop new players. Noel Williams, I think, is a budding star, last year's 3rd-round pick. But, it would have been nice to be able to go ahead and keep Trent McDuffie, who's only going to be 26 years old. But when you give all that money to guard and linebacker, then you find yourself, well, we have to make a trade. Now, he also would bring back more than either one of those guys would have in a trade. But they just kind of feel like they'll develop along the way. They'll find the pieces along the way. And really, I think it's why you saw Tyquan Thornton brought back on 2 years, $11 million, because they were going to line up Jalen Royals as wide receiver number 3, a guy who barely played last year if they didn't bring him back. Why they moved for a safety, because with Brian Cook moving on, they were going to be moving one of their nickels into the safety spot. So they're thinner than they've ever been. This has been their plan all along, but it's never looked as thin as it does right now and have as many holes to fill as they have to fill right now. But, they're all in. Like I said, stars and Jags. That's their approach.
Soren Petro joining Bleck Abdalla. He's from Sports Radio 810 in Kansas City, talking Chiefs football with Bleck Abdalla here on Westwood One Sports. Were you surprised that Travis Kelce is back in the mix for next season?
I'm not surprised. I wouldn't have done it. I think it's $5 million more guaranteed than he probably deserved. I mean, I think where are we at here? I mean, you want the player. You don't want to see him wear another uniform. I get it. But the world is full of players, that wore other uniforms. Reggie White wore a Carolina Panther uniform at the end of his career. I mean, John Unitas was a Charger. Joe Namath, on and on and on, right? Like, you'll be remembered for the team where you made your bones. And I don't think this is the best move for the Chiefs. I think it's somewhat precipitated by the fact that, like I said, the wide receiver position has another giant question mark hanging over the head of Rashee Rice with his lawsuit that's been put against him. Is he going to get an even longer suspension for a code of conduct penalty? Xavier Worthy has been a disappointment as a first-round pick, and then Jalen Royals really didn't play as a fourth-round pick. After that, it was John Brownlee. And so that's why Tyquan Thornton's back. I think that's also part of the reason why Travis Kelce is back. And I think the organization – he is a special player, maybe the second greatest player in Chiefs history. And so I understand going a little bit more, but that all sounds great until you lose. Like at 6-11, I was not fielding calls of people who said, you know what, I don't mind because Travis Kelce's out there. Let the good times roll, guys. Like, that was not the attitude of your fan base. And I think you're making a mistake when you put weight into thinking that they love the star so much that they won't mind. When you're charging extra money on your way out the door of a stadium that some people really love to watch a team that's not winning.
Yeah, and you Soren, you say it well, because like the NFL of any sport, life comes at you fast. And you could be on top one year, and you could be one of the best at your position, and then a year and a half later, you are now old, slow, and you're not producing the way you used to produce. So I could totally see Chiefs fans looking at the way that last season ended and being like, all right, we won championships with some of these guys, but we need to kind of build towards staying competitive for the future as well.
Yeah, and I think, fantasy sports, it's not real sports, but there's a lot of lessons all of us nerds learn that I think some general managers could learn along the way. Like when you prep your fantasy teams, there's one of these things they have on the players where they give the 3-year average. I think that's a good indicator of what a player is. So if you got 1 year that's like some breakout year or 1 year that's a disaster, you group it together and you get an idea of who this player is. Well, I like to do that with the Chiefs. Like the rolling 3-year average wasn't too bad, right, before this past year. But now when you drop off their first championship of the back-to-backs, now you have their second one where they were 10-7. You have a 15-2 team that was miraculous in its point differential, barely won all these different games. And then you have a 6-11. When you group those together, I think you're getting the picture of who they really are. That 15-2 is now the anomaly with the two seasons that are around it. And I think the Chiefs want to keep believing that they're, still the number one seed, and it was just a little bit of bad luck, and it wasn't. I think the biggest mistake that teams can make, whether it's, let's be honest, college sports is professional sports now too. If you're the GM, if you're the head coach, looking in the mirror and not being honest with what's looking back at you. And when you look at it and go, oh, we still got the number one tight end, you don't. You had a guy who was a great, wide receiver who's now a pretty good tight end. When you look at it and go, no, we're fine at safety, you weren't. We're fine at wide out, you're not. Like, you need to be honest with what's really looking back at you. And if you're not, if you lie to yourself, it's going to be a painful year. And so we'll see what the Chiefs can get done here to now. The deal does help them get more draft picks. They need more young, cheap talent. And with 9 draft picks and maybe some trade downs along the way, they can try to replenish their roster with more young talent. But they've still got a lot of work to do in this offseason.
That was going to be exactly what I was going to ask you next, Soren, is about this, specifically the defense and trying to get younger. Chris Jones isn't getting any younger. This team gave up the 10th most total yards on defense last year. They signed Tunga. He's almost 30, so that's not getting any younger yesterday. How does this defense get better? How do they improve? And is it mostly through the draft?
I think it will be. I mean, they do, like George Karlaftis, who they signed for $22 million per on average over the length of the deal, but the extension doesn't even kick in for another year, is only 2 weeks older than I think, not Bain, but the other Miami defensive end that's coming out in this draft. He's a talented young player that was in the same draft with Trent McDuffie. Good. Not great, but good to very good defensive end. And so he's one of the guys that they're counting on. They like Ashton Gelati at the other defensive end, but I think he's another good but not great defensive end. I think they're in the market for either a serious edge rusher or somebody along the lines of Chris Jones that can really help them collapse the pocket inside and make those good defensive ends look better because of all the blocking that they're taking up on the inside. You know, Nick Bolton is a very good middle linebacker. He calls all the signals for Steve Spagnuolo. That's his security blanket. That's why he's here, because Spagnuolo wanted him, and he is a very good player against the run, just not so great against the pass, and that's so much of the game today. You know, they are a work in progress. I mean, Noel Williams is a very good young corner. They're great at developing the secondary, and they're really hanging their hat on the fact that they can find guys in multiple rounds, which they've done all along. But they've got to get better on that front seven, and they've got to get better, particularly on the front four. And I think that's where you'll see a lot of their investment in this draft. I mean, you're right. Tong's a rotational player. He did have 17 pressures. He had his best season, but you know, he was a guy you could have had last year for $2 million, and now you're giving him $21 million over 3. So, you know, apparently New England knew how to use him. We'll find out if Steve Spagnuolo knows how to use him, but I think they're going to be looking a lot for big people up front.
Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 in Kansas City on the line with Bleck Abdalla here on Westwood One Sports. Yesterday, we were going through an exercise trying to figure out how many teams in the AFC could win a Super Bowl this upcoming season, because we were talking about Baltimore and Buffalo. And Soren, as we started listing off teams, we got to like 7 or 8 teams before we listed off the Kansas City Chiefs. How do you view the Chiefs' potential for a Super Bowl run next season compared to the rest of the AFC?
Highlight the word potential, right? I think in the past it was a certainty. They were going to make a run. Would they get there? Maybe not. Maybe they'd run into the Bengals' hot second half like they did in 21. Maybe they'd get all the way to the Super Bowl and have injuries and get beat up in it. But now it's about potential. You know, I had an argument with one of the guys who comes on my show all the time who I said, well, what makes Kenneth Walker signing a success? And he said, well, I think Super Bowl. I'm like, come on. Like, seriously? Like, so Derek Thomas was a failure. Neil Smith was a failure. Will Shields was a failure. Come on, it's not about Super Bowl. What does the player have to do? And he just kept saying Super Bowl. And I'm like, you know, this was a 6-11 team. Like that to me, that's okay for an analyst or a fan to look at it and be like Super Bowl or bust. But that's where I come back to. You have to be honest with what's looking at you. You were 6-8 with Patrick Mahomes. This isn't like, oh, Mahomes missed the whole year and we went 6-11. You were 6-8. And by the way, when he went down, your offense went from about 10th to 21st. I mean, it was the most abysmal thing you'd see. Now, that's why they've gone out and gotten Kenneth Walker. It's why they're keeping Tyquan Thornton. It's also why Matt Nagy's not here. I mean, I think there was a fundamental difference. Way too many RPOs. That's one of the things they got to get away from. I think they recognize that in a lot of their offensive linemen, they have road grader style offensive linemen, and they were playing passive, don't fire out football. And I think you'll see a change. I think they'll be under center more. They'll try to take advantage of the talent they have at the offensive line. It was the second most expensive offensive line in football last year, and it didn't look like that. I mean, it was a problem. And I think that's why you had Matt Nagy moving on and why they went back to Eric Bieniemy, and they're going to try to play more of a power style football and play action off of that and take some of the pressure off Patrick Mahomes, which he is coming off an knee injury. We haven't even mentioned that their quarterback had a knee injury late in the year. Now, he's on target right now to be ready for the beginning of the year. But, you know, usually you hear that and, oh, yeah, he's great, he's ready. And then the next year they go, well, you know, he was hurt last year. His first year back. Really, you need another year under your belt, which is what I expect to hear from the Chiefs. But a lot of his game has been escapability. You know, get out of Dodge, make something happen. We run the scramble drill. We make some big plays, and we move the chains. You can't count on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Soren, before we let you go, the NFL Network is reporting that Isaiah Pacheco is signing with the Lions. Did you expect him to be leaving Kansas City here in this offseason?
I did. I mean, Isaiah Pacheco was a fine signing or fine draft pick for the Chiefs, getting him in the 7th round. Excuse me. But, you know, there's a lot of motion and less progress. Right? Like I've made, you know, spinning around, you can move really fast spinning around, but are you going anywhere?
Sure.
The feet move, the head's moving, there's all this motion, but he's not really getting upfield. So look, maybe somebody can unlock that. I asked the question when they drafted him, how does a guy with a 4.35 40 go in the 7th round? And I looked and I'm like, well, how's a guy with a 4.35 40 average like 3.7 yards per carry in his last year at Rutgers? It's because the feet move fast, but they don't really get going, and he doesn't pack much of a punch. So I think he needs a new team. He needs a new approach. It would have been interesting to see what he could do with Eric Bieniemy, but they got about as much out of a 7th-round pick as you could get. So, you know, I think Chiefs fans wish Isaiah Pacheco well, but they really want to see something different out of that backfield.
Thank you, Soren. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
There he is, Soren Petro, Sports Radio 810 in Kansas City. He's on the beat. and he's got the insight of the Kansas City Chiefs. As Abdalla, we've been talking about for the last couple days, Kansas City and their future. Where are they going? They have Patrick Mahomes, obviously still in his prime. I like what Soren was pointing out there is like a part of what makes Mahomes is that magic and his ability to move. He's going to be coming off a knee injury. So when you look at a player that's his specialty, I'm not sold that that's going to be able to show up when he returns immediately next season.
Well, and that's why I don't think they'll ever admit it. And that's what Soren said. Like, they'll never say that they're not going all in and not going for it. But competing in that division, competing in this AFC is going to be very tough. Giving a running back $15 million, giving Travis Kelce $12 million, it just doesn't seem like a team that is going for it and spending money on premium positions that would be going for it. Like, you want to fix that offensive line? That's when you give a center like Linderbaum a bunch of money to protect your quarterback. Like, that would have made sense. That's a team, okay, we're going to protect our quarterback and give our center a bunch of money on a young center that can develop that can play and protect our quarterback. That would have made sense.